Hello, I'm Cynthia Chang Correa. I'm the president of the Council of Competitive Intelligence Fellows. And thank you for joining us for the CI Fellows Global Perspectives, the Canadian, Portuguese, and UK communities of practice. I'm delighted to be launching this global practice series, of which this is a part, to really showcase how our practitioner and our colleagues around the world are practicing CI and also their various perspectives. And also importantly, to engage other practitioners as well, like you, in these discussions. This really isn't just about looking at things from their point of view, it's also about learning. And so it's very important that we continue this type of cross-fertilization as CI continues to spread around the world and gain traction, evolve differently as well to adapt to different needs. So whether or not you are researching different types of countries, or whether or not you're just looking for some inspiration for your own practices, I think you'll get a whole lot out of this discussion. So please be prepared, to wear these different types of hats, looking at this, from different ways that you might be able to gain from these types of discussions. And so we're just delighted to be kicking this off with our colleagues Rostyk Hursky, Luis Madureira, and Graeme Dixon. And so as a quick start, I just want to mention that we do have a chat. So for those of you who are new to this format, please feel free to participate in that webinar, Zoom webinar chat forum. And we also have a Q&A feature as well. So if you look at your control panel, you'll see that there is a folder with a Q, and so you can post your questions there. I'll be monitoring those so that our panelists can discuss. So occasionally, I'll be coming in with questions, introducing the topics that you're discussing, as well as questions that you're posing. So please feel free. And then for those of you who actually do want to join via voice, please feel free. You can lower your hand, and if you are blocked from speaking, I can unblock you, and you can just be sure you're unmuted as well. And so we'll try that out this time. So with that, we'll begin. And a quick introduction to the Council of Competitive Intelligence Fellows. We are a not-for-profit educational organization. And initially, the Fellows began as an honorary society within the Society of Competitive Intelligence Professionals group. However, we are our own standalone group now, helping to support the growth of CI communities and CI practices around the world. And so we collaborate with various types of organizations and associations, as well as host our own events and programming. And so we really support these along 4 dimensions: as ambassadors, as champions, as mentors, and as educators. And so please be on the lookout for our various activities. Some of you have already joined our newsletters, a newsletter to get updates, but we're also on Twitter and LinkedIn community group, as you see there. So if you want to learn more about our programming like this one, as well as new exciting ones that we'll be launching, please join, and also join the conversations that are there as well. So, so without further ado, I want to introduce our speakers, and I'm just absolutely delighted to introduce Rostyk Hursky. And so he is the Director of Impact and Strategy at Saskatchewan Health Research Foundation. And he is a leader in the CI space in Canada, but also CI fellow, so yeah, so around the world as well. And Rostyk is an innovative thinker, thinking along the lines of how we can practice CI in non-traditional ways. So I'm really excited for what Rostyk is here to share with us, as well as sharing with us, obviously, his perception of the Canadian perspective as well. And we have also Luis Madureira, the managing partner of Uber Brands. And Luis is fascinating because he created the CI community of practice in Portugal before there was a SCIP Portugal, and so that evolved into that actually because of Luis's leadership. And Luis has also had a wonderful history, as you can see, through through advertising and marketing, as well as pure CI. And he's also pursuing his PhD right now. And so he'll have also some terrific insights in terms of his studies, as well as being a part of Portugal and EU and various other countries that he has worked with as well, in Africa as well as South America and Latin America. So I look forward to Luis lending that dimension. And then we also have Graeme Dixon, the CEO of Octopus Intelligence, joining us. And Graeme is the head of SCIP UK. And so we're excited to bring in that perspective as well as Graeme's perspective from UK. And it's very, very interesting period right now. And Graeme's operation also works around the world. And so I think we're going to have some really interesting perspectives from Graeme, not just from the UK practice, but how he practices in understanding CI globally too. So please extend a welcome to our speakers, and I'm going to take a step back and turn it right over to them to talk about global practices. And to start, just to say that it's just tremendously important that we do look globally, even if we are focused on domestic markets, even if we are focused, if we are locally situated, simply because of the nature of CI practices today. And so I'm going to turn that over to our colleagues to comment on that and to take this conversation where you want to go. So thank you all.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Who's going to start first then?
Graeme, go ahead.
Please do.
Well, okay, I mean, the first thing I would like to say is what is competitive intelligence? I mean, what is intelligence? It's very, very varied around the world. What's your perception? What people think? Not what you think intelligence is, but what your customers think intelligence actually is.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very interesting perspective. I might jump into this from the Canadian perspective. So I'm here representing a big, wide, spread out country, but I'll provide you with some of my perspectives. And interestingly, I did some intelligence on intelligence. So I talked to some of the people, who are practicing intelligence in Canada, and I asked them some of the questions of, what's happening in intelligence here and how it's going. And Graeme, you bring a great point. That intelligence here, especially when you talk about competitive intelligence, is not something that is looked at as a positive thing. It's for us, when you, first of all, a lot of leaders, when you talk to them, they don't know much about the official definition of what competitive intelligence is. They might have a concept, they might have an understanding, but when we bring up competitive intelligence, it brings up some questions about ethics, about legality, about certain things, and that people are not comfortable in talking. And so that's one of the challenges or opportunities for us as practitioners in Canada. We have to be innovative with how we define intelligence and how we approach it. And I think from my perspective, we've been actually utilizing words like collaborative intelligence or items like insight or foresight are coming out more, and that's what people latch on to. I'm going to stop on this and open it up to Luis and you as well, but I just wanted to say that to us, competitive intelligence is something that we struggle with defining, and I think it's also because people don't have a really good understanding of what it truly stands for and what it is.
Yeah, I will start with the definition of competitive intelligence that we find in research, so in the scientific and research community. And lots of papers actually mention what you just said, Rostyk, about there's no kind of common and agreed upon definition globally, not even locally. Portugal, we have exactly the same point. There's a lot of people saying that business intelligence is actually a broader definition than competitive intelligence, which I don't agree. But there are also a lot of CI professionals that actually do CI, but they are in for example, strategic marketing departments or just marketing departments, to be fair, or even in sales or even in finance. Since the beginning, and since I start in competitive intelligence by an invitation to join a company and to set up the CI function in that organization, which was kind of at that time Central de Cervejas, which is now Heineken Portugal, I actually found the need to define intelligence. And from the beginning, I tried to make it kind of as quick and short and concise and clear as possible. So the definition I use in pretty much, even when I teach, I use this definition, which is actionable insights on the competitive environment to improve firm performance. So with this, you basically covered everything. So the main challenge I find with the definition of competitive intelligence is actually the scope, because the actionable insights pretty much kind of people have a good idea of what it is. When it comes to the scope, then it's when the problem starts to arise. So for example, what's the difference between market and competitive intelligence? What's the difference between marketing and competitive intelligence? What is the difference between business intelligence and competitive intelligence? These are the main, I would say, the main issues when it comes to competitive intelligence and into defining what it is. So I'm actually working on that to also structure all this, what I've just kind of said, into a framework. So kind of both in the research community, but also in the practice community. So pretty much kind of most of us who I believe are here today. So we can actually kind of have this a very kind of easy way of stating the difference between all these concepts. So again, for me, competitive intelligence are actionable insights on the competitive environment to improve firm performance. I'm not sure if you have the same opinion, Rostyk and Graeme.
Well, in the UK, intelligence has got it means a lot of things, and lots of different companies do lots of different types of intelligence. There's a lot of people that have left government agencies, 6 and 5, that have joined their own, they've joined up and they've done their own thing, and that's a different type of intelligence, but still it's the same sort of principles. Within the UK, I think competitive intelligence gets mixed up with business intelligence. Mm-hmm. I've spent years and years and years and years trying to work out how to simplify what intelligence is, and there's some great explanations of what intelligence is. But I just think what we do in our business is that it's just answering questions that companies need to ask, and that is the one-liner when it comes to intelligence. Mm-hmm. Answering a question that someone needs to ask, and they need to ask it so that they have to make a decision. So once they've made a decision, they're basing it all on intelligence. You've got to keep it simple. I think a lot of competitive intelligence, and I don't think SCIP's helped here, to be fair, has made it very, very complicated and make it sound really, really special. It's not. It's just answering questions. Now, obviously, intelligence is a lot more to it than that. But if you tell people, the decision maker, that answering questions that you need to ask, or of that sort of thing, it's just answering questions, you make things a lot simpler and people understand it straight away.
Yes, thank you. And actually, I do want to ask Luis, you are conducting a study right now, mm-hmm. that for which you have counted the number of different intelligence definitions there are. You mm-hmm. shared with us during a recent CI Fellow meeting. Would you want to elaborate on that a little bit to support?
Yeah. So far, I've come across 150 definitions, or around 150. But I'm also using definitions that are actually very similar to the one that I just gave you, but are used to define another concept or other concepts. So, for example, environmental scanning, or strategic intelligence, or even market sensing. So most of these, and even if you go into the information science, the definition of information science is very, very similar to what we've just, what we're talking about actually. And again, this is why I'm focusing on developing a framework that allows us to establish the boundaries of what's in and what's out of competitive intelligence. And if within competitive intelligence, so what, for example, and answering kind of the point that Graeme just made about the difference between competitive and business intelligence. So competitive intelligence, I would define as the actionable insights on the competitive environment to improve firm performance. Business intelligence, I would say it's exactly the same thing, but it's the information that we already have within the business. So the difference is just kind of the scope. So it is within the business. So it's kind of already in our kind of internal servers, if you want, or internal databases or internal repositories of data and information. And this would actually clarify the definition. When it comes to marketing intelligence compared to competitive intelligence, then it's a little bit more tricky. Although the definition stands exactly the same, but all the focus and the perspective taken on the analysis or on the insights is actually the marketing one. So it's basically to support the decision making for the marketing. And then you have, of course, to understand what marketing is, which is basically kind of how do you get kind of a customer loyalty over time in a profitable way. So this is, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but this is just kind of the points that I wanted to make when it comes to the definition.
Wonderful. And actually, I want to just direct some attention to the chat. We actually have some questions here that are being posed. And one is, Justin Soles, and please forgive me if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, asks, what is the difference between collaborative and competitive intelligence? And Craig Fleischer has offered, is it the difference between collaborative and competitive a reason why SCIP has chosen to use the terms strategic, integrated, and competitive intelligence? Or is that just confusing the whole discussion even more, right?
Cynthia, I was just following some of that as well, and I was gonna, if I may chime in from my perspective to build on from the discussion that I said, where competitive and collaborative for us works. This is just again to bring in my experience has been in CI in the public sector. So in provincial government type of organizations where if you approach individuals and you talk about competitive intelligence, they right away come to you and say, well, we're not competing really. We're there for the greater good of society, to represent the community. And so the word collaborative for us works really well from that perspective when we talk about intelligence. To build on top of that, collaborative, when we talk about collaborative is, and again, Luis and Graeme will talk to this hopefully, but for us, collaborative means integrating competitive intelligence all across the organization. And so it doesn't have to be a specific CI unit. It doesn't have to be a grand team of individuals. It can be one individual who's responsible for intelligence that integrates themselves throughout the organization, whether it's with marketing, with sales, with business development, with technology development, with IP, with finance, and gets an input from those individuals to provide, like Graeme said, the what we call is an enabler of better decision making. We sell intelligence as the function that enables you to have a better decision. So you as the decision maker, whether it doesn't have to be at the CEO level, it doesn't have to be at the C-suite level, it's at decision making level. And so whoever across the organization is making decisions, whether it's in finance or marketing or business development, we through intelligence and collaborative intelligence can provide them with insights that enable that decision to be made better. So without us, they would not have had the insights that we were able to provide them. And so we use that as clarification, and actually that works for us really well, at least in the public sector, when we're talking at the government level. Those are the things that stick to individuals when they. So again, maybe it's different in some of the private sector companies, but even talking to some of the private sector companies here in Saskatchewan, again, the words decision maker, enablement, collaboration, all those things stick really well. So that's my take on elaborating a bit more what I meant by when we said collaborative versus competitive.
Yeah.
Great. I mean, collaborative and competitive intelligence, it's all intelligence in my opinion. And when a potential customer ring up and say, I've got a problem, I don't ask them, Is it collaborative intelligence you want, or is it competitive intelligence, or is it business intelligence? We're there to solve a problem. And I think that's the key. You've got to solve that client's problem as soon as possible using intelligence. Now, whatever intelligence it is, they don't understand completely what competitive intelligence is. Clearly, there's a lot of debate around the world that what competitive intelligence is. But it's just answering questions. It's just knowing the right answer, and then deciding what you're going to do with that intelligence. Now, I think collaborative intelligence is actually using the intelligence once you've got it, is using it, and then allowing people to see the power of intelligence, and everybody else gets involved because they've seen the power. Wow, this intelligence is brilliant. It just saved us $95 million. Brilliant. Let's see what else we can do with the intelligence. Wow, we just got new customers. Wow. And people see the growth. People will then start to grow, and that's collaborative intelligence. So people start sharing everything internally and externally.
Yeah, Graeme, just building up on the question. So I think that you are basically mentioning or referring to KICS, so the key intelligence questions. Just to let you know that I think that's the perspective I also have as a consultant. When I was in the client side, so when I set up the CI function for the company I mentioned, we ended up with more than 300 key intelligence questions. So it's the point I want to make. It's on top of you just said, so it's answering questions, but you also have to prioritize the questions that you need to answer. So you need to prioritize and to give focus to the ones that actually increase firm performance the most. So in order kind of to make these feasible, otherwise it's too many questions, and it's very difficult to help or to help the decision makers, if you want. So the final users of CI.
I suppose it's actually finding out what the decisions need to be made, and what's nice to have, and what you must know.
Must know
to absolutely.
That's exactly that. So I filtered those by the kind of the strategic pillars of the company, and by kind of the strategy that the company had to implement over the course of the next year, and over the course of the strategic plan, which was kind of 3 to 5 years into the future.
Yeah, and I just want to bring our attention back to the chat. And Justin had just picked up on Graeme's point about ROI. And so this is something that has also come up recently too, because Rostyk, actually, you're not going to toot your own horn, but your group has just won an award for some work that you've done on ROI as well. So perhaps the three of you would like to talk more about that, and how you're able to define that value for CI.
I can, yeah, definitely. And so this is interesting. This again came from the perspective of you weren't trying to answer a question of the ROI on CI. We were trying to answer a question of what's the return on investment of the money that's flowing into a funding program that we as an agency are funding, so that we can showcase whether that program, like how much return that program can potentially generate. So, but it was utilizing some of the intelligence techniques, and we utilized a bunch of different methodologies. One is the ROI Institute Phillips methodology for ROI. There was a CAS framework from the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences. There was a whole bunch of methodologies that we utilized, and we basically asked individuals who received funding questions of how much follow-through funding did you receive as a result of this program? How much can you attribute some of this funding to be because of the funding that you received? How confident are you? And we utilized those bunch of calculations and questions and formulas, and we came up that for every dollar that we invested into this program, researchers attributed $2.62 on top of it as a return on investment. So basically, this is one of those. So I want to talk about the ROI on CI, and I agree with Justin. This is, every conference and every individual you talk to within CI, this question comes up, and it is there's a lot of anecdotal stuff that is considered the ROI on CI. And then, so for us, it wasn't necessarily we were trying to answer a question about the CI aspect of things, but we utilized intelligence to build out an ROI model, which the ROI Institute just awarded us an award for the most innovative approach to using an ROI methodology. And so we're trying to now extrapolate it and basically utilize it for all of the programs across the board. But this is one of those things where potentially it can also be utilized by a decision maker for potentially something like competitive intelligence as a function. How much money would you attribute to a project that the intelligence enabled us to do? There's a whole bunch of questions and the things that can fall within this, but it still is a lot of qualitative. It still is a lot of fluffy, as you would call it, information that might not be measurable. But again, to me, from my experiences, it's been how much impact are you providing to the decision maker, and that to them is the ROI. Is if you're allowing them to make a better decision on behalf of the organization and move it forward. And to me, the two basic things we're trying to do is avoid risks, and the second thing is identify opportunities and build on them. And so those are the two things as a business leader. If we through CI or intelligence are helping you achieve those things, that is the ROI on it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, ROI is very difficult thing to understand. But as you say, it's to do with making decisions and what actions have you actually taken as a result of that intelligence. I've got a great example last year of a project we worked on in America, where a company was looking to buy another company, and they probably spent 25-30 grand with us, and they saved $95 million not to buy that company that they were looking at. That's the power of competitive intelligence, and you can measure that by the fact that £95 million was saved. $95 million was saved by not buying the company. We looked into the company, looked into the culture, looked into the person that owned it, and it became very, very clear, very, very quickly that this person thought he was the next Facebook, and in fact he wasn't. It was very old technology, and this company decided not to acquire it, and that is the power of intelligence. They wouldn't have known if they'd looked at the spreadsheet, because the spreadsheet looks great. Everything looks great. The investor was interested. He'd met him for a drink and meal. Delighted. Everyone was delighted until we looked under the bonnet. But again, it's asking the right questions, and those questions need to make a decision and create action. If you've got decision and action, as you just said, that's your ROI.
Terrific.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I have a very kind of particular, if you want, perspective on the measure of competitive intelligence, because what I would say is that almost impossible to measure it, because in order for you to measure competitive intelligence correctly, you would need to evaluate two different alternatives. So if I decide towards left, and I need to evaluate what that decision actually kind of brings in terms of value, and then I have to evaluate if I go right, what does that right means in terms of value, and then I would have to compare values. The issue is that in strategy and decision making, you cannot do that, because you can only take one decision or follow one strategy. So what normally kind of you can use as a measure of competitive intelligence is what we call risk avoidance. So for example, if as just Graeme just said, if I kind of actually kind of do not or recommend for M&A, for example, doesn't go forward, and actually I save a lot of money, because then you see that that company is not as valued as it was at the time, then you are able to measure that, but that also you just measure that alternative. So you will not be able to measure if you actually did the M&A. And if you did the M&A, probably that company would lose a lot of value, and that would also be a measure of not having competitive intelligence. So you would have to measure those both alternatives, which is really, really difficult. On the other side, for example, if you measure, imagine clipping, so kind of all the editorial, let's call it, kind of mentions to our company in the, for example, in TV or radio or newsletters, newspapers, magazines, and so on. If all the company reads the clipping, imagine that they would invest kind of 100 hours to do so. If one person in competitive intelligence reads all the clipping and summarizes and just kind of highlights what is important and send it just to the right person, that would save, for example, I don't know, 50 hours. So that kind of that saving, that would be also a measure of the CI value. Okay, so there are a lot of different ways to measure CI, and I would say that it's almost impossible to get a kind of a one standard way of measuring kind of a CI value. Even if it's just kind of if by informing the decision you are making the decision maker more comfortable, that also has a value, and is actually kind of the peace of mind of the decision maker, which in the end allows and creates value for the company. So you can measure these kind of in a really amount of ways.
Thank you, Luis, and all. It's a terrific perspective, and we've got a robust chat going on. I want to just shift our conversation a little bit more, because we have a question that's been waiting in the Q&A box for a while from Richard Caldwell, and so now we're moving more from the value of an existential discussion, to something more practical. So here we have Richard asking, do you segment your CI activities by the phase of an opportunity? For instance, market level wide CI work for early entry to a market, tactical pricing, technical and product positioning for head-to-head competitions. So any thoughts about that? Or and also Richard, if you want to elaborate on that, I'm also happy to unmute you. Actually, you are unmuted. You just have to unmute yourself. Anyone want to talk about segmentation by the phase of an opportunity and how you approach the various facets of CI practice?
I'm not sure if I understood the question correctly. No, so the idea is kind of how do we segment the different key intelligence questions or topics? Is that it?
Yeah, my question was the phases. This is Rich Caldwell. What was the phases of the opportunity? In my business, we have phased opportunity. So if I'm looking at something maybe 3 or 4 years out, I'm doing market level intelligence, because it's more of a market level effort that I'm doing. I'm trying to shape the market versus a tactical thing, which is only 2 months out, and I have to submit a bid. And I have to know my tech solution and how it matches the requirements that the customer put out, and how my tech solution compares to the competitors and my price. So they're completely different efforts. And I was wondering if anybody else did phased approaches like that. Okay, I got it now. So on my perspective, I would have like kind of two kinds of intelligence approaches. One is kind of to address the strategic issues, and the other one is to address the tactical issues. For that, I use the matrix of important versus kind of urgent or not urgent. Okay, I think it's called the URI window. And then I classify, and I normally start with the ones who have more impact and kind of deprioritize, or kind of leave the ones who are more kind of tactical and are not so have not such a big impact. Okay. The other thing that I think that you are also asking is about foresight. So should we focus on the kind of on the present date and the decisions that need to be made now, or should we focus on the future?
And for that, and this is my personal perspective, and I'm sharing kind of my own personal perspective on CI, I think that we should always be looking forward. Okay, so looking you have to be proactive. So for me, if you would ask me what is your most advanced level of CI, for me that would be running scenarios and running war games on those scenarios. So I have pretty much all the possible strategies ready for when the a competitive environment actually goes more towards one scenario or towards another scenario. I just choose the strategies and the tactics that I need to cope with that scenario. And I think with that, I might have answered your question.
If I can build on that as well. So for us, again, from the public sector perspective, and this is again what we've been doing, in the organizations where I'm now, again, setting up CI and intelligence, and then utilizing it for the purpose of driving the organization forward. We've brought, basically the way that I've broken it down is by calling it a snapshot, an insight, and a foresight. And if you can think of the snapshot as more of the day-to-day intelligence, it's the tactical, it's the things that are happening that are impacting the decision maker in the very short term. The insights is more of the let's build it out, let's utilize it, the strategic perspective, and link the intelligence that we're providing to strategy and to all of the aspects of where the organization is going forward in the midterm. And then foresight is building out, again, the bigger, grander scheme of things, of being comfortable with making assumptions that you're going to be wrong with, being comfortable with understanding that there's various scenarios that will play out, but it's also providing the decision maker, again, who's also uncomfortable with making seeing that far into the future, to provide them with intelligence that actually allows them to be more, I'll build on what Luis said. It's not even proactive, it's preemptive in a way where you're trying to potentially build something that doesn't yet necessarily exist. And maybe if that's something that you as an organization see an opportunity for, you now become, if you're acting on it appropriately, you might become the leader in certain areas, right? So it's building the future that you want to work towards or work in a way, right? That's what foresight, that's what we've been utilizing foresight for us. And I can see it on the, bringing it, again, we're talking about global perspectives. On the Canadian level, there's a federal agency called Horizons, which exists on the federal level, and they have quite a few employees. And their role, if you read into what they're doing, is to provide the federal government with insights and foresight on some of the potential mega trends and global issues that could be impacting Canada. And again, so from that perspective, there's still questions about, they produce, a report per year, and they spend a lot of time looking at those things. And, there's a lot of intelligence that goes into it. But, on the federal level, and that to us, at the provincial level as well, is provides an opportunity for utilizing intelligence from that kind of strategic, tactical, and foresight perspective. So,
I think it's all down to the question still as well. I think even if it's long term or short term, it's all about answering the questions. So you have your key intelligence questions for the long term, and you have them for the short term. Obviously, the time frame varies significantly. If it's something that's going to happen in 3 weeks' time, that gives it 100% priority. You've got longer term questions and strategies. And what decision makers, I think, need or want is certainty, a level of certainty. The more certainty, the better, which allows them to make better decisions in the future. Competitive intelligence isn't mind reading, isn't looking into the future looking into the future and saying this is going to happen. There's no certainty. Yeah. But it's just making sure that the certainty is as good as you can get.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And I think it sparked a lot of interesting feedback as well from on the webinar chat. And actually, I want to make sure that we have enough time to address some of the early discussions, the ones that we've had prior to the webinar, about practices globally. And how the importance of that global perspective or holding multiple perspectives helps us in our own practices. And so, for example, Rostyk, in our early conversation, you talked about we're working with, say, as a Canadian, we're working with U.S. firms, right? And some of the issues that might arise from that. Luis, you talked about conducting, human. We'd also talked about conducting published research and open source intelligence in Africa, in various African countries. And Graeme, you also were working across different countries. So if you could talk a bit more about some of those topics as well, some of those practical perspectives that really help shape how you might approach the way that you collect intelligence and generate analysis.
Yep, I can jump into that. So definitely, kind of a in Portugal we have kind of a Portugal was spread all around the world, so there was a time where we kind of split the world with the Spanish. And we have kind of a communities of Portuguese people pretty much all around the world. So when we sell a product, for example, in beer, what happened is that kind of we sell a lot of beer in Angola. So the way to collect data and to develop intelligence, you have to be very, very aware of how the culture is different in different countries, either kind of in the way or the amount of information that people share, but also kind of what they mean of when they say a specific word. It can sometimes even the same word have not different meanings, but kind of enlarged or extended meanings. So you really have to be aware. Also, there are kind of countries with different levels of development. So, for example, some countries in Africa are now mobile first. So, kind of you have to find the ways to get the information and the data you need so you can then develop the insights. There are countries that kind of you really have to have kind of a human intelligence, so kind of a local people to collect that information within the context of that market. Otherwise, kind of what you see, for example, if you just use social web listening, so if you are just listening from afar, you might get the wrong kind of, the data is correct, but kind of the insight that you will derive from that data is not the correct one. I'm not sure if you guys share the same.
Yes,
the same,
absolutely. You've got to use local people. It's all about your sources. You've got to develop your sources so you know exactly who you're talking to, and they know their market too. And one of the best ways of doing human intelligence is actually going out there and getting your boots dirty and getting on the ground and talking to people. We find when we've got the budget to do it, is going out, talking to people, and getting an insight, actually seeing the person face to face. And also, when we speak English, I speak English, I don't speak any other languages, I can probably get more information out of somebody who's not doesn't speak English as a first language, because they're trying to explain to me in greater detail on what they mean, and sometimes they slip out a little bit more information slips out, and then you try and verify that information.
And if I can build on some of the topic questions that Cynthia has posed, and then the discussions here. Canada, we have our next door neighbor where CI kind of originated in some areas, and it went from there's a lot of writers about CI, there's a lot of publications, there's a lot of consultancies. Looking at, and again, this is looking at the Canadian perspective, there's not even close to as many consultancies across Canada that will provide you with specific CI outputs and whatnot. And so, like Cynthia said, for training, we have to go to our next door neighbor in order to attend conferences and training and some of those things, because there's not a lot happening here. And so but again, the stuff that we get is not necessarily the stuff that we need, because for example, if you go to an American company asking about the state of the industry of cannabis industry in Saskatchewan, well, again, they're going to provide us with a somewhat different perspective than what we actually really need. And there's no reports out there that you can access as a practitioner to say, well, this is the global perspective of what Saskatchewan cannabis industry is like and what it's growing. So you do have to rely on whether it's your intelligence practitioners across the country, or you have to rely on the human networks to basically get access to the information and intelligence and build out the story and build out whatever the input and the insights you can provide. Again, providing as neutral of a perspective as you can, so that you can look at the risks and the challenges, the opportunities, the negatives, the positives, and provide a holistic perspective to answer the question. And to us, again, that's the key point. Is sometimes we as intelligence practitioners are asked to provide intelligence that the decision maker has already made their decision on. And so, they're asking for intelligence to basically support sometimes the decision. And what we as practitioners have to do, and to us, I think we use it to our advantage, is that we are a neutral perspective. We provide a neutral perspective on the question, and our job is to provide you with the positives and the negatives, and so that again, your decision can be a better one. And so what I found is when I was talking to some of the individuals who practice intelligence across Canada, and there's about, at least from my perspective, from who I know, there's about 12 or 15 individuals that I could talk to and I reached out to. And really what becomes interesting is that the areas where intelligence is the most strongest across Canada is where you have the strongest leaders and the strongest provocateurs driving that intelligence. So for example, in Ontario, the legal aspects from Zina and what she does, the legal application of intelligence has flourished because of some of the things that she's doing. On the East Coast, you have someone like Justin working in areas where it's more like a small business enabling organization. They provide training for small businesses and intelligence. In Saskatchewan, I've applied across the board for kind of the public sector and the government, provincial government level type of organization. So it's really interesting to see. I think in Canada it's flourishing. It's intelligence is really growing all across the board, but it's growing in areas where you have a lot of leadership in driving that intelligence and pushing the boundaries and really standing up and being the provocateurs and innovating with what you currently have. And I think we have a little bit of I don't know, again, Luis and Graeme might agree or disagree, but from us, when we're usually placed in an organization to start a CI function, you're working with very minimal to zero budgets. And so you have to be innovative. You have to, the reality is that I think we in Canada are innovative with CI because we really have nothing to lose. We're starting with zero budgets for CI. And so for us, we have to show what we can do as intelligence practitioners with very minimal budgets and very minimal Anyways, I'll stop at that and open it up to that.
And I just actually want to call up a bit of a point made on the chat, where Jean-Francois says again, our approach will adapt to the U.S., to English-speaking Canada, French-speaking Quebec and culture. He highlights the fact that cultural sensitivity and cultural awareness is so important. And I think, particularly those of you who are at least bilingual or multilingual will certainly appreciate this. And perhaps you can also speak to what that affords you. And not just in terms of the practical matters of translation, but also perspectives, how you might view the world.
Yeah, I would like to, building on top of that, and also on what Rostyk just said, I think about the neutral perspective. So I think that is really, really the essence of CI, is being neutral. And also, where does intelligence stops and where strategy begins. So my perspective, if you want, is that you should provide all the alternatives, okay? And you also have to be very humble and you have to suppress your ego. Suppress your ego in the sense that you should not be tempted to come forward with this solution. You should come forward with the alternatives so the decision maker can actually make the decision. And this is where I think sometimes most of us fail. So we should suppress our egos when, for example, we are collecting the information. So we should listen. You know, the 2-1 rule, which is like you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you should listen the double of what you speak. And that I've always kind of mentioned this kind of when I teach. And also, if you suppress your ego and you open your mind, will start hearing things that you would not listen otherwise. So whatever culture it is, if you keep yourself kind of open-minded and try to kind of apprehend all the nuances of kind of the culture, the way people are talking about. So it's not just about what they say, it's also about how they behave. So their body language. So Humint is not just kind of about what people say, it's also about what they are doing, kind of how, if they are talking fast, if they are talking slow, if they stop, where they look, if they are kind of going into their memory or kind of inventing things, or if they are saying one thing but their body language says the opposite. Kind of all these things are very, very kind of important. So this is kind of the two
as well, Louis.
Yeah, go Graeme.
It's what they're not saying as well.
Exactly, as not saying as well. So these were the points I wanted to make with this.
I would say that you've got to tell the truth. That's what intelligence is. Intelligence is right. Whether it's, you know, you've got to tell the truth. Sorry, I'm waffling now, but you've got to tell the truth. So if someone asks you a question, you've got to answer truthfully. We had a webinar a couple of months ago with SCIP, and one of the participants asked, what if it's bad news? Well, if you're stuck in a hut and you're about to get bombed, you need to know. And I think it was a stinging indictment on the organisation that the person worked for, that she was probably a little bit frightened to actually tell the truth. And it was a major, major company. You've got to tell the truth, and you've got to tell it how it is. That's where intelligence fails. Any military intelligence fails because people don't tell the truth, or they don't want to upset the general.
Same thing in companies.
Yeah.
I actually have a story to tell. Rostyk, I'm not sure if you have something you want to add.
Yeah,
or
go ahead. I'll follow in after.
So I don't think I'm allowed to say which company it is, but I actually was hired to do a competitor kind of a profile, so of one of our customers. And I did, and I presented, and then I actually told the bad news to our customer, which was not about the competitor, but about themselves. So basically, kind of their slogan, each time they were promoting or they were communicating or promoting their slogan, they were actually building business for their competitors, especially because they were on a business-to-business environment. And they didn't ask me to, but I kind of get into the point where saying, look, this is what your competitor is doing and their business is going well. And one of the possibilities is that this is actually happening. And then I introduced that theme and kind of supported that with data, or actually in this case, insights from the competitor. So you are claiming that you are good at this, but look at the footprint of your competitor on this. And their footprint is actually kind of 3 or 4 times the dimension of yours. And the last 3 years of investments in that footprint is actually beats completely your own. So if you are claiming that you are good on this, you are not actually good on this. So you have to, so building on Graeme's point, you actually have to be the guy who's completely neutral, which tells the good things, but also the bad things. Otherwise, you will not be a trusted advisor. And I think that in the end, what we are is trusted advisors. So we are not strategists. We can be. So we should also have an opinion. So if we put all the strategies or all the alternatives in the table, and if someone asks us, we should have an opinion. But that is also our informed opinion. But kind of our job is actually to make those alternatives very, very clear, and then the decision maker can then kind of do their decision.
Well, building off of what each of your points, it is important to tell to deliver your message as resonantly and truthfully as possible, of course. There's also the matter of some cultural, linguistic, even personality perspectives, right? And so do you find that it's useful to use certain types of linguistic or even cultural tools to be able to adapt your message according to who it is you're talking to? So for example, Luis, if you are speaking to an American, it's a different way of delivery, right? If we're looking at, say, for example, at Hall's a spectrum of high context and low context cultures. Yeah. Some cultures are much more verbally direct, and others are more symbolic. So, for those of you who work across, actually, all three of you have worked across different countries, and also with different nationals of these countries. How do you adapt your messages to different types of clients so that it is comfortable, resonant, and above all, truthful?
Yeah. Again, I think that it all comes down to being as truth to the facts as possible. So, for example, if you are presenting to a Brazilian or if you are presenting to an American, it's different. If you put it into words, you have to kind of reword it maybe. If you put it into a graph, then like kind of you can present it. It's just the way you present that changes, and that might also help you. But the main point is actually very well kind of put across, if you know what I mean. So you have to also to take that out of the equation. So for example, when I teach dissemination to my students, one of the points is actually kind of for example, you cannot put kind of more than 3 messages into one slide, or you cannot use more than 4 colors, and these kind of rules. And this has got to be kind of pretty much the same to everyone, because it's the way we communicate. Then you have to adapt if you are into person, or if you are doing a written report. Then you have to, if it's a written report, you have to change that on the writing. And if you are doing a presentation, you just adapt the way you present. That is my very, very personal experience. I'm not sure if
I can add to that, from my perspective, what's been working is again, I think it's as low on the level as individualistic perspectives. You have to really understand from an individual decision maker what is the driver of their decision. Like you have to learn from the perspective of your messages have to go according. So you might your message might be the same, but you might deliver it 3 different ways to 3 different individuals because their drivers of decision making are different. And I think you have to really understand the decision maker and who you're delivering to in order for you to be effective with your intelligence and the intelligence that you're providing, whether it's across government or across individuals or across organizations. And just before I lose the train of thought, when we were talking about intelligence gathering within organizations, decision makers tend to usually look at external factors first instead of looking at internal factors as influence of something that's happening or that might be going wrong or going right and whatnot. And we as intelligence practitioners, our job is to not only look at external but to look at internal, and to be comfortable in stating that, hey, maybe it's something that internally is happening that is not working or that needs to be revamped, or that is working great, one or the other. But we have to be that, again, the neutrality is and comes from the fact that we are answering the perspective from external and internal perspective, kind of the intelligence and insights, and really bringing it into that whole aspect, the holistic perspective. So
I've written down a few things. Your questions and your answers need to be extremely simple. If your 15-year-old can't understand what the question is or what the answer is, you've failed. These people that are wanting the answers are extremely busy. So it's got to be very, very simple and to the point. But you need to surround it with some good news as well, obviously, because it's general management. It's a sort of sandwich. You've got the good news at the beginning. You've got what the problems are in the middle, and so these are the possible things you can do about it. What can you do about it? So this is the problem in very, very simple terms, and these are what you could do with it, but that's up to you what you're going to do with it, because you're the one that's going to make the decision.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all. We're reaching the top of the hour. And I want to thank you, all three of you, terrifically for giving us your insights and perspectives. And I just want to point to a post that Craig Fleischer, fellow Craig Fleischer made about the fact that despite you're all being in different regions and coming from different origins into CI, there's more consensus than there is differences among our discussion here. So so I find that very interesting, and I think maybe something for us to chew on. Also, I think importantly, you've given us a lot of wonderful ideas on which to build for future webinars, other discussions, other forums that we can have. And I would encourage you to for those of you who are in the audience, please join our LinkedIn community group, so that we can continue our conversation there. We also have Twitter, and so we've had tweet chats before. Now, for this particular session, we'll be bringing this to the LinkedIn community group for a continuation, because Graeme, Luis, and Rostyk are on that, as well as other fellows who can weigh in. So I just want to thank you all so much for this, and as a final thought, I want to be able to share with you here just their contact information. So you can reach out to them, follow them on Twitter, and again, thank you for another robust chat, terrific ideas that are there, and so we can summarize some of these and also bring it on to our Twitter community for us to pick up on for future conversations. So really, thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and the final words?
I just wanted to basically say that, it's been an honor to be a part of this panel, to kind of start off the discussion, and to put a call out there to all CI practitioners who are all interested in intelligence to continue working. There's a greater good behind intelligence, and I think if we as a community can become stronger and really looking at the bigger picture, and whether it's those big hairy questions, those big scary questions, those big mega trends, nothing is really impossible. We can do one tiny thing as all together combined, combining our powers, combining our intelligence, our minds, and then collaborate on those things. I just pull, and those Canadians who are on the call, let's get together, let's start the conversations, let's continue these discussions. That's my final thoughts.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time. Kind of the most important thing that we have these days. It's our time, and kind of really honored to have Rostyk and Graeme in this discussion, and kind of discussing all the perspectives with you guys. Thank you very much, Cynthia, for facilitating all this. Thank you for the invitation, and happy to continue the conversation in any other channel. Thank you very much.
Right. My final thoughts are that all the information, all the intelligence is out there. You just got to look for it. And once you've got to keep looking and looking and looking and analyzing in between the lines. It's out there. You have to be. You don't have to be unethical or illegal about it. It's all out there. Just you need to ask the right questions.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you all. And so please be on the lookout for our announcement for our March webinar. So we'll be putting that out. If you're not on our newsletter list, please sign up for that. You can also just reach out to me on that as well, and we'll put you on that list. You can find all those details on our website, and so that's www.cifellows.com. And there'll be more fellows and more esteemed guests, joining us in future webinars as well. So we look forward to seeing you on social media in the meantime. So thank you all so much. This has just been a blast, and also just enlightening again. So another thanks to our guests. It's been such an honor and a pleasure. Take care now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.